She's not only a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. She's not only one of the most visible human rights defenders in Europe in recent decades. She's not only a tireless activist with profound empathy for others. She is also a thinker, someone who reflects deeply on the moral foundations of freedom and dignity. In this episode, we discuss the moral ideas that hold Ukrainian society together. You're listening to the Explaining Ukraine podcast, and my guest today is Oleksandra Matviichuk, a prominent Ukrainian human rights defender and head of the Center for Civil Liberties, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld and president of PEN Ukraine. Explaining Ukraine is a podcast by UkraineWorld, an English-language media platform about Ukraine run by Internews Ukraine. This episode is produced with the support of the Ascord and Dear Fund, implemented by Ihor Kozlovskyi and funded by Norway and Sweden. Before we begin, a quick reminder, you can support this podcast on Patreon. We rely on crowdfunding to continue our work. You can also help fund our volunteer trips to frontline areas of Ukraine, where we support both civilians and soldiers by providing mostly books for civilians and vehicles for soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. All relevant links are in the episode description, so let's begin. Oleksandra Matviichuk, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm so happy to know you, and my full admiration for all your work, and I'm happy to have you as a friend with whom I can talk about different things, including my kids and your travels and our travels and everything else. Tell me a little bit, one thing. I think you're one of the most vocal, one of the most known voices in Ukraine right now. And this, of course, came after the Nobel Prize. Do you think that it changed the way of the attention to your voice? It kind of increased it. Tell me a little bit about this.
Let me start with a very obvious thing that not Nobel Peace Prize changed my life. The large-scale war has changed my life completely. Because everything which I called normal life was ruined. Like such simple things, the possibility to go to work, to meet with your friends in cafe, to have family dinner, to hug your beloved ones. It's crushed and disappeared in hundreds and hundreds of pieces for me and for millions of people in Ukraine. Because to live during the large-scale war means that you live in total uncertainty. You can't plan not just your day, you can't plan your next several hours because you have no idea what will happen. To live during large-scale war means that you live in constant fear for your beloved ones because there is no safe place in the whole Ukraine where you can hide from Russian rockets. So this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has changed my life completely, not Nobel Peace Prize. But Nobel Peace Prize made a very important thing because for decades, the voices of human rights defenders from our part of the world weren't heard. We spoke for decades that country which grossly violate human rights, killed journalists, jailed activists, dispersed peaceful demonstrations. Such country provided threats not just for their own citizens, but to the peace and security in general. Russia is a bright example. And probably we was heard, but only in such platform like UN Human Rights Committee or OSCE Human Rights Dimension meeting, but not in the rooms where political decisions were taken. So Nobel Peace Prize made the voice of human rights defenders tangible, and this is a huge change.
Do you see kind of a dynamic in the past maybe 2 or 3 years? Many people are talking about the diminishing interest to Ukraine. When I follow your travels and the big platforms you are speaking on and the big people you are meeting, including presidents and prime ministers, I don't kind of feel it. when I go also abroad and see the big audiences that are gathered for Ukrainian events, I also don't really feel it. But at the same time, I see on the dynamics of the audience on UkraineWorld that it is just decreasing, and is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. What are your perceptions?
I think it's very natural because, unfortunately, Ukraine is not just one hotspot in the globe. There are a lot of fires for current moment, and people are dying and suffering in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, in Myanmar, in Sudan. So not just in Ukraine. And these people also need attention. And even more, I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but we happen to live in very turbulent times where the world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. So it's very easy to predict that such fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe because this international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. And that is why it's a wrong strategy to compete for attention, because today's victims tomorrow will be easily replaced by victims from other parts of the globe. So it's not a strategy how to survive and how to make things done in such circumstances. What I also feel, I now travel a lot because international advocacy become a part of my daily work. And I was in countries of Africa, countries of Latin America, countries of Asia, in Europe, in United States. And I always face very warm welcome. Because when you speak to the audience about what's going on in Ukraine and who we are, for what we are fighting for, you feel a huge understanding, because despite the fact that we can be far from each other from geographic point of view, we are very close when we speak about values. We're all humans. And this is a very important connected point. And I think that in our situation, probably it will be literally weird to hear about people who do documentation of war crimes, but we must speak not just about war crimes, but first about senses, about what we are fighting for in this war, about values which make Ukrainians able to resist to such enormous opposing power. And second, I feel obligation that we must speak not just about ourselves. We have to build coalitions and speak about more general level, because we must do something with this international wiring, which is faulty.
That very resonates with the way how I think, and I do think that we cannot talk only about Ukraine. We should kind of locate the Ukrainian story within the network of all other stories. Let me ask you still about Ukraine and coming back to Ukraine and talk about the census, because you do it very, very well. There is this discussion about peace and how actually Ukraine should do some concessions to achieve peace. And our argument and your argument is always, look, there is a difference between peace and occupation. And your formula that I like very much is to say that occupation is a continuation of war with other means. Can you explain this?
It's true that sometimes I found myself in a very strange position that I have to convince someone that Ukrainians want peace. It's ridiculous. For sure, people in Ukraine dream about peace, because war is horrible. War probably is the most horrible thing which just can happen in a human life. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace. That's Russian occupation. And occupation, it's also horrible because it's the same war, just in another form. I know that some people who have no experience, what does it mean to live during war or occupation, even from the best intent, they think like that war is so horrible that, okay, occupation is not in line with international humanitarian law, but at least occupation decrease human suffering because the active military battles would stop. Unfortunately, it's not true. Occupation doesn't decrease human suffering. Occupation just makes human suffering invisible. Even more, for a lot of people on these territories, occupation, it's a beginning of their suffering. And when we speak about Russian occupation, it's also important to emphasize that it's very specific kind of occupation, because it's not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. This is Russian occupation. So we speak about very difficult questions and there is no simple answers, but I just ask for honesty. Those politicians who think that Ukraine must give up part of the territories in order to satisfy Russia's imperial appetites, they must be honest and to explain that this means that we propose to leave millions of people there for torture and death, that we don't care about these people.
And in this sense, you wrote once a very important text in which you were saying that, look, Ukrainians are kind of a non-ideal victims, because ideal victims would be those who will lose and who will be just have compassion. And you're fighting in your speeches, in your text, against this image of Ukraine only as victims, this victimhood, because the ideal victim is somebody who is not there, who is dead. And you just have a memory of this victim. And Ukrainians do not want to be just victims. In one of your phrases, you said that, probably you can be tired of compassion, of having compassion, but you should not be tired. You cannot be tired of having people that inspire for fight and inspire for struggle. Can you explain this to us?
Sure, but first I will make one step back and explain why I got this insight that we are not ideal victim, because suddenly I understood that our struggle can be annoying for some politicians, because it's put them in uncomfortable position that they must do decisive actions, and they don't want to do it. And I can compare, because this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014, so it's going on for 12 years already. And when we sent our first mobile groups to Crimea, to the eastern regions of Ukraine, we was shocked with this brutality against civilians, because Russia uses a terror as a way how to save control over the occupied territories. And we sent numerous reports about torture, sexual violence, extrajudicial killings to UN, to Council of Europe, to OSCE. We communicated with international bodies and foreign governments, but nobody was interested, because it was very easy to close their eyes, because once again, occupation makes human suffering invisible. But you can't close your eyes when the whole nation is fighting for freedom and human dignity. And it's put you in this uncomfort position that you have to do something and you don't want. And that's why you are annoying not with the action of aggressor, but the action of country who defend itself from this aggression. And that's why I start to think about this concept of non-ideal victim, because for such kind of person, it will be better that Russia will occupy us. For sure, you and me will be killed, and a lot of people as well. And they can just tell sweet words about our deaths and about how they disappointed with Russian action, and that's all, and forget. And there is no decisive action needed because everything is finished. But returning to this concept of victim and dignity, let me illustrate it with a very important story which resonate with, I think, millions of people in Ukraine. I interviewed Ukrainian professor, scientist Ihor Kozlovskyi. He is originally from Donetsk, and he spent 700 days in Russian captivity. Before this, I interviewed hundreds of people. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their own genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon, so it was little that could surprise me. But Ihor Kozlovskyi, he mentioned detail which was insignificant for the evidence base, but this detail struck me because he told how he was kept in solitary confinement in basement cell where without window. It means that it was no light, no fresh air. The cell was purely ventilated, and it was very difficult for him even to breathe there. Sewage flows on the dirty floor, and through the opening of the sewage, rats were crawling down. And this is detail which impressed me. He told, and once again, he is well-known professor in my country. He told how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats just in order to hear a sound of human voice. And legally, Ihor Kozlovskyi is a victim because he was illegally kidnapped, illegally detained in unhuman conditions. He was beaten and tortured so severely that he had to learn how to walk again. But also he said that all his experience, it's not a reason for him to treat himself and to experience himself as a victim. Because the basis of our existence is dignity, not victimhood, and dignity is action.
I think it's very profound because my impression of the way how, for example, Europe, the Western Europe perceived the Second World War is through victimhood, and how the idea of those who struggle, who resist, was kind of covered over and overshadowed by the idea of victimhood. An idea of victims. And it's good to have the memory of victims. It's good to tell their stories, but it's not enough. It's not enough in a world where you need to stand up and fight against evil. And thank you for mentioning Ihor Kozlovskyi, who was also a great friend and a great personality in PEN Ukraine. And you launched recently the prize in his name. And we've talked about him with Maxim Butkevich recently on this podcast, so I refer also to him. Let me ask you about freedom. We touched upon this a little bit. And one phrase of from one of your speeches also resonated very much. You say, freedom is not a value of self-expression for us, but a value of survival. And this also resonates so much with me because it refers to these, value studies where you have this opposition between survival values and self-expression values. And it's true that we were told for many years that survival is bad, self-expression is good. If you're in the mode of survival values, it's bad, you will not be developing yourself. Well, now we see that, it's not always bad to be in the survival values because as closer you are to a possibility of non-existence, of death, at this moment you probably feel how you cherish life and how you cherish freedom. How would you explain to me this phrase that freedom for us is not how you express yourself, but basically is the basis of our survival?
I got this insight when I reflected about our struggle for freedom. because we can say that this war is going on for 12 years, but when we go deeper, we understood that this war is going for 3 centuries. Because for 3 centuries, we, being Ukrainians, are fighting for a freedom in all senses, for a freedom to be an independent country, not Russian colony, for a freedom to preserve our unique identity and not to be forced to educate our children as Russians, and for a freedom to have our democratic choice to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. We don't need Russian Tsar at all. It's not our mentality. It's not our way of life. And we are paying the highest price just for this chance. And this struggle literally is going for 3 centuries. This struggle for freedom. And that's why I'm confident that for Ukrainians, freedom, it's not just value of self-determination like for some other countries. It's a survival value because Ukrainian language was prohibited not just now by Russian-occupied territories, but by Valuyevsky, Circular, Yemsky, Ukaz, and other decree of Russian Tsar. So we would never survive and exist as a Ukrainian nation if we will not be so stubborn in our fight for freedom. And that's why freedom for us is survival value. And making a link between this concept of victimhood, I think it's not honest towards people who died. Because when we look to these people only through the concept of victimhood, we deprive them in their internal ability to fight for some senses which drive them, senses for which they want to live, they want to fight, and if it happens, they give lives just for the senses, for these values, for these humanistic ideas.
I think it's really important, and I think when we reflect upon our history, it's very easy to history and present. It's very easy to be in this victimhood narrative, and victimhood narrative, and you also formulated in one of your recent posts, is to have a locus of responsibility outside. And whereas you're saying that Ukrainians, well, this at least is active part of your Ukrainian society is those people who have the topos of responsibility and of action inside. So you basically talk about subjectivity or subjecthood. When you look at Ukrainian society today, what do you feel? Do you still feel that there are many people with this sense of responsibility, of sense of action, sense of agency? Because, of course, in the society, there is a lot of people who are passive. And I think this fatalism of being passive and saying, I'm not deciding anything, is definitely a characteristic of the current Russian society, but it's also present in Ukrainian society. And it's also present in Europeans and in Americans everywhere. This sense of I'm a little human being. I do not decide anything. So I would rather pick up a dictator who would say, I will sort out things. How do you feel? Is this sense of agency and subjecthood is still strong in Ukraine, or it's weakening? Because these people, responsible people, are dying. We should also say this.
I think you are totally right. People are different. People are different. The question is how many citizens any country have. Because we can have a huge country with a huge population, but with a very less citizens, like Russia. Because citizens, it's not just a person with passport. Citizen, it's a person with responsibility. And in Russia, we have 140 millions of people, and unfortunately, vast majority of them have this way of thinking that we are ordinary people, we can change nothing, the government know better what has to be done. If our president has launched the war, so it was a right decision. There is no even sense to influence to the event because we are so small and just big powers govern our lives. And so it's a type of mentality. It's a way of thinking of population. And I think personally that it's not honest, because it means that these people voluntarily deprived of their responsibility. Because in the vast majority of things and life events, we still have a choice. We still have a choice. And I saw it even in Russia. I was very impressed by this story of family where a girl wrote the anti-war drawing, and a teacher told to the director of the school, and director of the school referred to Russian FSB security service, and her father was arrested and jailed because his daughter wrote anti-war drawing. And the daughter was put in orphanages. He spent several years in Russian prison. And now, unfortunately, they reunited after these years of separation. And okay, it's a choice which probably people don't want to make because it's beyond of any imagination of zone of comfort, but it's very honest choice. And I just want to illustrate that even in such condition, people have a choice. But it's very natural that people don't want to have the result of the choices. That's why they deprived of the choice at all. In Ukraine, we have different people, but still we are able to resist to Russian aggression because our way of thinking is based on another things. We are ordinary people, but we can do extraordinary things. We have no effective state institution, so we will take responsibility for our own shoulders. Even more, we will stand behind the state institutions to help them, to strengthen them, to do their functions in such a period. And it's very visible when we speak about the beginning of the large-scale war. I was in Kiev. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. But not just Putin. That time, all international partners were confident that Ukraine has no potential to resist. Because they evaluate our strengths only from the point of quality of state institutions, and Russia evaluated our strengths only through the prisma of resources. And they both were miscalculated because they don't believe in the power of ordinary people. And when international organizations evacuated their personnel, ordinary people remained. And ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. It were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who broke through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid. And suddenly it became obvious that ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity are stronger than even the second army in the world. And I think this is our main message to the world, that ordinary people still have power to change the history. Because even in developed democracies, the political elite lose their faith in ordinary people. This is a problem. And I think that Ukrainian model can be very therapeutic for well-developed democracies, because our strength is not in centralized vertical, like in Russia, and even not in well-developed state institutions. I'm sorry, we restored our independence only 30 years ago. We have no time to build such sustainable, effective state institutions. But our strengths in agency of ordinary people, in local democracy, in grassroots initiatives, in self-organization, and this perception and belief of people that their efforts matter.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think now the big existential question between Ukraine and Russia is whose model is stronger. Is our model, which is based upon grassroots initiative and locality and individual efforts, or the Russian model where everything is top down? And it's obvious for me that in the peaceful time, our model is stronger because it can develop good economy, good society, good cities, etc. Now Russia tests us with the war and with violence, whether our model would survive during the extreme violence, which works very well when it is top down, when there is a commander who says, kill them all. And in previous elements in our history, the tragic element is that we will not be able to be stronger. Now there is a big question whether we will be stronger this time. Let me ask you about justice, because this is the topic that you are really working hard upon. We have how many war crimes registered? Over 100,000 Russian war crimes?
170,000.
170,000.
It's official numbers of Ukrainian Office of General Prosecutor.
And this is a horrible amount of war crimes. And we understand that each episode, each war crime requires a lot of investigation and the courts and tribunals and everything. We are still very far from this idea of international justice. So what is your approach to this? Do you believe in justice after this war?
I believe in justice even during this war. And my main message is that justice is not privilege for winners. Justice is a basic human right. And that's why we must do decisive legal actions now, without waiting how and when the war will end. And I think that it's a main mental barrier for a lot of justice efforts, because when I spoke with presidents of different countries or members of parliaments or prime ministers or members of governments of these different countries, I still see that they look to the world through the lens of the Nuremberg trial, where Nazi war criminals were tried only after Nazi regime had collapsed. So it was victorious trial. And they still have this impression that justice is a privilege for winners. And even they never say this publicly, but in a dialogue, you see that they look to the situation like this. Nuremberg trial, it was very essential step to establish law and justice past century. But our world rapidly changed after this. UN system was created. A lot of new international treaties were signed. European Union emerged. The idea that human life and human freedom is essential and vital became a part of the post-war humanism. So we live in a new century. We have our own historical responsibility to move the international standard further. And that's why I so welcomed this agreement between Council of Europe and Ukraine, which was concluded in June this year, to establish special tribunal on aggression, to prosecute people who made this leadership decision to start this bloody war, which opened a path to hell and to this 170,000 war crimes.
So when you look at these different types of crimes, and there is a discussion among international lawyers where we should look at. Ukrainians, of course, use this word genocide. You also say that this is a genocidal war. But lawyers often say that the crime of genocide is very difficult to prove because there is this idea of intention and conscious intention. So there is an argument of Philippe Sands who says that let's rather look at the crime of aggression rather than crime of genocide, or it's easier maybe to prove that there is a crime against humanity than genocide. I mean, all these are very legal specificities, of course, and they should not cover the essence from us. But what do you think? Should we look at the crime of aggression first?
For sure, it can be different vision about strategy because we speak about resources, human resources, our time first and foremost, and that's why it can be priorities in this strategy. And different people have a different vision what must be such priorities. Also, it's important to emphasize that crimes against humanity, it's not less serious than genocide. Some people think that genocide, being a crime of crime, is the most serious. It's not true. Crimes against humanity, if you look to the punishment, have the same level and must have the same level of attention. But I think that this war has genocidal character, and despite our strategy, we must to call a spade, because without this understanding, it's very difficult for President Trump to understand while Putin reject all transactional profit deal for him and for Russia on the stage and continue this war. Because it's existential war for Ukrainians. Putin openly says there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. And with this war, he tried to make his words converted in practice. And we see it in occupied territories, where Russians physically exterminate active local people, like children writers. For what they killed Ukrainian children writers? Or how they banned Ukrainian language and culture, or destroyed and dropped Ukrainian cultural heritage. And when they take Ukrainian children to Russia, they put them in Russian education camps. They told them, you're not Ukrainian, you're Russian children, your family, your parents refused from you. You will be adopted by Russian families who will bring you up as Russian. So for Ukrainians, it's very clear that we have no choice, because if we stop resisting to Russian aggression and Russia would occupy the whole Ukraine, we will cease to exist. And it's also an explanation why Putin don't want to stop this war, because this is war against Ukrainian identity. He want to liquidate Ukrainian state, which is a platform where we can be Ukrainians. And this is also a very interesting reflection how people in Ukraine see the state. It's not just a list of services. It's a platform where we can be who we are. And I know this comments of lawyers, with all respect, they told very rightly that UN Convention against Genocide is a tool which will be probably difficult applicable in such situation, because all international treaty, it's a result of political compromise, and this UN Convention has no all dimension which Raphael Lemkin designed when he invented this crime of genocide. But once again, why it's important to call the spade a spade. There is no necessity to be a lawyer to understand a very simple thing. In order to achieve your genocidal intent, to kill partially or completely some national group, there is no necessity to kill all representatives of this group. You can achieve your genocidal intent just with forcibly changing of their identity. And sooner or later, the whole national group will disappear. And being a lawyer, I also understood that we put so much attention to this theoretical discussion. We must look what's going on the ground, because my fear is that while we speaking, do we have enough evidence or appropriate legal tools to prove that this is a genocide or not, we can reach the point when Russia starts to do such things that even the biggest skeptics stopped to be doubt that this is a genocide. But I'm sorry, it will be too late for us.
It is an existential war for Ukraine. It means that this is a war to be or not to be, right? It's a war for existence. But the problem is, I think that not many people understand that this is an existential war for Russia itself. Somehow in their minds, they persuaded themselves that they cannot exist without Ukraine, that Ukraine is their origin. And this whole myth that Putin is putting forward, that Russia started when a Kiev prince with Scandinavian origins, Volodymyr, was baptized in today's Crimea, somehow they cannot live without this myth. And this is some kind of very strange psychoanalysis that should be done within the Russian intellectuals to start thinking about Russia without Ukraine. Right?
I think that this is a responsibility of Russian elite. They have to invent another myth which can be used as a myth for the Russian state. And this myth has to lose their imperial character. Because the current Russian myth, which driven Russian state, it's about new territorial achievements. It's ridiculous. Russia pretends to be great, but Russia is very poor. And people who live in depressive regions, whose children has no social lift at all in these depressive regions. They live in unbelievable poverty, without any access to so-called great Russian culture. They still think that they need to occupy more and more land. It's a problem of Russians, and it's an obligation for Russian intellectual elite to propose some other idea.
They have it in their history. They have the great idea of Novgorod, a republic, or Pskov, but it was so much long time ago. And it's true that they based their statehood idea upon the idea of tyranny and empire and the greatness. And I think one of the greatest problem of Russia is this willingness and desire to be great. And they achieve their greatness through small people, through turning their citizens into population, as you say. Maybe my last question, what gives you hope today?
I am a human being, and I am documenting war crimes for 12 years, and this is not what I'm dreamed to do in my life, frankly speaking. I have a huge empathy to people, and when I was a student in law faculty of our national Taras Shevchenko University, I told to myself that I would never ever do something which connected with criminal law, because I have empathy to people and it will harm me. But now I'm dealing not just with criminal law, but with international humanitarian and international criminal law, the horrible atrocities which must have attention of the entire international community. So for sure, I'm temporarily in different mood because it's very, very difficult to get used to such situation. And I don't think that war is a norma and war crimes are norma. It's not norma at all. But I think that we have to define the hope properly. And I very often quote the Václav Havel phrase that hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine, but hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning.
Oleksandra Matviichuk, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld, an English language media outlet about Ukraine. My guest today was Oleksandra Matviichuk, a prominent Ukrainian human rights defender and head of the Center for Civil Liberties, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld, and president of PEN Ukraine. Let me remind you that you can support our work on Patreon. We rely on crowdfunding to continue our work. You can also help fund our volunteer trips to frontline areas of Ukraine, where we support both civilians and soldiers. We provide mostly books for civilians and vehicles for soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. All relevant links are in the episode description. Let me also remind you that this episode is produced with the support of the Askolt and Deer Fund, implemented by Isar Jednania and funded by Norway and Sweden. Thank you for listening, stay with us and stand with Ukraine.